When I was growing up, I spent a lot of time playing video games. For me, it was an escape from an almost daily set of drama and hurt. Eventually, I found games like Halo, and through that, I found Red vs. Blue. I was captivated, and I got my mom to buy me the entire series box set once it finally came out. It absorbed me, and I was sucked into watching dozens of content creators online, some of whom I still watch to this day. But everything changed when I was 15 and came to faith in Jesus. Now hold on, I know, this isn't going to be a video about how I was a gamer and liked these things and now I hate it all because now I know Jesus. No, I actually still love these things, but I see them through a completely different lens now. I still play games and watch shows online, but for a time after I met Christ, I didn't. I walked away from all of it and hated it. I saw it all as wrong and unhealthy, which I think for me at the time, it was. Let me explain. I love Red vs. Blue, and the guys at Rooster Teeth were my idols growing up. I listened to their podcasts and watched everything they made religiously, but I didn't want to just watch them, I wanted to be like them. I started making YouTube videos and was desperate to create something like RVB, so I was going to make a show called Crash. I worked on it loosely for about a year, but eventually it fell apart because I was 13 and I was too young to record my voice and I didn't have any resources to make it. But fast forward about 10 years, I'm an adult with a wife, money, free time, and friends, and so, after having a drink or two, I decided I would try to write the entire first season using all of the writing expertise that I had gained by writing poetry and even working on an album that never got released. So I got to writing, and you know what? I had a lot of fun. I wrote the first episode, and then the first 11, then the first 20, and I continued working on it for about 2 years, until eventually I teamed up with a group of people and we decided to put the first episode out. It took a few months, but episode 1 was done and I put it online, and people really liked it. It was only up for about 2 weeks and we got about 200 subscribers and a ton of great comments that I still have saved. And this positive response was super intoxicating. So I got to work on episode 2, but that's when things started to go wrong. Things started falling apart. A few of the people who were key in making the show just left the project pretty suddenly. Now, this video is really not about them or why they left, but looking back, I completely understand why, because I came to realize just how massive Crash had become to me. I was, well, obsessed. I spent every waking moment working on it or else brainstorming what I could do with it. I put my blood, sweat, and tears into making it as well as I could, but it was consuming me. I honestly thought that if this series could work, it could be my future career. I was getting way ahead of myself, I know, but this show had turned from an innocent hobby and passion into something much darker. Back in 2012, when I first came to Christ, I kind of gave up playing video games and watching a lot of videos online because I realized they were kind of escapism for me and I really needed to focus on dealing with my problems head on. At the time, those things were unhealthy and not right for me to indulge in. But years later, I'm an adult now. I have the maturity to go back and watch these things and they don't occupy the same amount of space in my heart that they used to. The result is I can enjoy these things with a healthy enjoyment that doesn't go too far, but I really think that Crash is not one of those things. Because, truth be told, Crash was so rooted in a desire to be internet famous and to be liked and to have the glory that I was giving to the people who made these shows when I was a kid that I don't think I can separate it from that, even all these years later. For me, making Crash had become idolatry. Now, let's pause right there. What do I mean by idolatry? As a Christian, I believe the sin of idolatry is making something out to be more important and more of a source of meaning than God Himself. And the fact is, I began to tie my entire self-worth to Crash and its success. I wanted to be accepted and loved, to be famous, to be admired, to have the same glory that I was giving to the creators I was obsessed with as a kid. That idolatry never left my heart, it just went dormant. And the moment I tasted the slight bit of success, it came roaring back into my life in a big way. It became a destructive force in my life, stealing my time, my joy, my patience. Eventually, I knew I had to walk away, and when those people left the project and a bunch of other things went wrong, I knew that God was telling me in no uncertain terms, it was time to kill Crash. And so I did. I deleted every trace of the original video and deactivated the YouTube account. And truth be told, it really hurt. I loved Crash and I poured my soul into making it, and watching it fall apart was probably one of the most deeply unpleasant things I've had to do in years. But now, coming to the other side of it, I'm really, really glad that I did. I'm fully convinced that this was God at work in my life. See, I had ignored God's warnings in my heart about my idolatry and my obsession and just pressed on anyway. And now I was left with an ash heap that I once banked my hopes on. I banked my whole worth on it, so losing it almost felt like losing myself. In the book of Genesis, humanity, after rebelling against God, decides to create something so that they could have meaning and worth apart from God. In Genesis 11 it says, "Then they said, 'Come, let us build a great city for ourselves with a tower that reaches into the sky. This will make us famous and keep us from being scattered all over the world.'" They wanted to make themselves famous. They were seeking glory, to have worth and value that came from what they made instead of who they were in God's eyes. Every human being is made in God's image. Every single one is deserving of dignity and respect. And the source of a human being's value doesn't come from what they do or what they make or how likable they are, but from the fact that God loves them and treasures them. And in Genesis, humanity was rejecting that, going their own way and seeking their worth outside of the one who gave them worth and purpose in the first place. So God, knowing this and seeing how this would ultimately destroy them and separate them further from Him, came down and scattered them away. He tore down that tall tower they were building. And I felt like He did something very similar in my life. He tore down this tall tower of Crash, and to me it felt like the end. But He did it to save me from myself. Truth be told, if Crash had continued to grow, I think I would have become increasingly enslaved to it. It would damage my relationships even further, and eventually, when it all fell down, it could have very well taken me with it. And you know what? It hurt me so much to just let go after making one episode. What would have happened if I did it for years, for seasons and seasons, because I had a long plan for it? I would have continued ever deeper into building my entire foundation for life on Crash, and then, when it eventually would fail and fall, as everything does, I would lose my purpose for living with it. So I believe God was saving me from a much worse fate, a horrible disappointment, a disaster, which would have been brought on by success, or even if it had failed. It would have cost me more and more with each passing day that it took root deeper and deeper in my heart. I still have a love for making content and creating, though I have to keep my ambitions and desires for attention in check, because God was so good to me in this. See, what felt like my life collapsing was actually God Himself cleaning out my heart from selfishness and sin that had taken root so deeply. Now, I don't know if maybe one day I could try again and attempt to make Crash something that honors God, or if that would even be possible, but I've learned not to cling to it. Some days I wander back and think, what could have been? But I know that my true worth has never come from what I make, or if people love or accept me. It comes from the fact that God loves me and gave up everything to purchase my life from sin and death. He gave up His own life in exchange for mine, and suffered for my crimes so I wouldn't. And I still want to make videos and document some of my interests and hobbies, but it doesn't matter now if this video or any of my videos break even 20 views. I'm just sharing my testimony of one of the many, many great and kind things that the Lord has done in my life. And I think that this testimony, and being faithful to the God who loved me first, will have a greater impact than any web series I could ever make. In Mark 8:36, Jesus said, "And what do you benefit if you gain the whole world, but lose your own soul?" Who knows if Crash would have been actually successful in the first place, but I suppose it doesn't matter, because a life lived faithfully is so much more important. And to be clear, I'm not calling things like Crash or shows like RVB wrong or sinful or idolatrous. I just know that in my heart I was obsessed. And you know what? Maybe you don't have the same level of obsessiveness that I have. I can still watch all of those old shows and enjoy them, though sometimes I don't because it can sting thinking about what could have been. But I don't hate Crash or resent my time working on it, or the awesome support I received for episode 1. A big part of me probably still wishes that I could have either kept working on it or never released it in the first place. That way, nobody needed to be disappointed when it ended so suddenly. Nevertheless, I believe it's better this way. I feel that I'm living more faithfully to my God, and I hope my sharing this will have a positive impact on somebody who's watching this. Maybe there's a tower that you're building that God is in the process of tearing down. If that is the case, please take heart. He is good and worthy of trust. He isn't sinning against you, and he loves you perfectly. Trust God and look to Jesus Christ for your purpose and value. And hopefully in doing so, you will avoid the same crash that nearly took my heart with it.